he used up all of his bumper that time, and I thought that perhaps Earnhardt came off a little early on the gas that time, which is a good way of trying to break the line of the fellow behind you. Here's Waltrip, keeps him straight, but he keeps on tapping. Now Waltrip on the inside. Side by side. Down to the inside.
Oh!
4 cars, there it goes.
There's Bo 9 into the fence. Joe Rutland spins around. Who's going to win the race? Where's Kyle Petty? Darrell Waltrip's alongside of him.
There's the hook. Bang.
Earnhardt came down, caught the right rear of Darrell's car. There's Darrell Waltrip's Chevrolet, and it is torn up.
Gone away.
It's stalled on the back straightaway. It can't go any farther.
He'll hit who on that last thing between you and Darrell?
I just racing. I ain't gonna, me and Darrell's got to race week to week, and there ain't nothing to it.
Because Steve Soper's let him through. Tim Harvey is leading the championship again. Fantastic. But John Cleland is attacking Soper. He's up on 2 wheels. Soper holds his line. He's pushed right out to the right. He attacks again as they go to the right-hander and Luffield. And they both spin. They're both out. Soper and Cleland both out of the race. 2 very determined chargers, each refusing to yield, and they've both paid the penalty. And it is for John Cleland utter dejection.
I just have to say, the man chopped me a couple of times and he runs into me. It takes me straight into barriers. I mean, what are we doing here? Is this stock car racing or is this motorsport? He might get away with that in Germany where he might be Mr. Superstar. But this is clean. The man's an animal.
While it's obvious from the content on this channel that most of my motorsport education is in American racing, motorsport in Europe can be very exciting, especially with how different each motorsport is, and what similarities can exist between them and NASCAR, for instance. I have a friend who moved in an opposite direction. He's a lifelong fan of European motorsport who recently converted to NASCAR, and in talking, he brought me some interesting views about one particular motorsport. As a lifelong BTCC fan, Ace, channel in the description for those who want to check him out, posits that NASCAR and the British Touring Car Championship are eerily similar, and honestly, I think I agree. This video will be a little bit of a fun diversion, and admittedly we might be stretching a little bit, but I'm not going to let that get in the way of a good long-shot comparison. To start with, let's look at the birth of our 2 sports. Okay, there were no British bootleggers smuggling fake cognac or whatever, but the very first sanctioned races that we know today as NASCAR Cup Series and the British Saloon Car Championship, the initial name of the BTCC, had one thing in common. They were strictly stock series. NASCAR fans know how the story of Big Bill France realized that manufacturers weren't interested in funding the modifieds with drivers racing cars from before World War II, and decided to make the strictly stock series as the main draw of NASCAR. Well, our friends across the pond had the exact same idea. British motorsport racing, of course, far precedes the first 1958 British saloon car race, but the series was devised specifically to allow showroom road-going cars to race. The first ever championship was fought between Tommy Sopwith and a Mark I Jag against Jack Sears in an Austin Westminster. Not too dissimilar from the Americans with their Chevys, Fords, Chryslers, and Buicks, if not a little bit less powerful and a little bit more, well, British. Okay, but this is just the first season of competition. Even if you know nothing about the BTCC, you know that cars racing today aren't actually grocery getters from the showroom. They're purpose-built race cars. It's arguable in both sports when we went from cars your dad could get at his local Ford dealer in the US and in the UK to what we have now, which are basically fire-breathing, purpose-built track cars. But there was a specific moment in NASCAR when it was obvious that things were beginning to get a little bit out of control. In 1969, Chrysler Corporation had a massive missile contingent. Ironically, these same missiles usually had Ford guidance systems. It had moved a lot of these same engineers to their automotive division. One of their first jobs that they were tasked to do was take the Dodge Charger and Plymouth Roadrunner and make them incredible race cars so they could stop getting their asses handed to them by Ford and GM, who at this point were still running circles around them. The result was the Dodge Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird, the first cars to hit 200 miles per hour in NASCAR, and who were only allowed to race because Chrysler somehow homologated these automotive freaks of nature. Well, I'd wager this sounds mighty familiar to the Brits, because they had their own issues with the homologation specials with wings. In 1991, to fix an issue with the BTCC's class system, more on that in a little bit, a new regulation known as the 2-liter formula was put into place. This served a few purposes, including moving away from Group A race cars that had dominated European and Australian racing at the time, and instead putting the focus on mid-range front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive cars that the manufacturers wanted to sell. Well, one of the stipulations was that every car on the grid had to have identical bodywork to the showroom cars. This is why early BTCC cars of the era looked so subdued with that little decollete spoiler at most. That is, of course, unless you're Alfa Romeo, and you happen to share a parent company with, oh, I don't know, Ferrari. You might look at the rules and instead of thinking, my race car needs to look like a road car, you think instead, well, I can do whatever the hell I want to my road car to make my race car faster. And thus the 1994 Alfa Romeo 155 Silverstone Edition was born, sticking out like a sore thumb among the more sedate, pedestrian-looking super touring cars around it, with huge, almost GT-style rear wing and front splitter. The car dominated in 1994 and put TOCA, the BTCC's governing body, in a very awkward position. See, NASCAR solved their wing issue by specifically controlling the car's proportions. The BTC's answer? Well, they did the exact opposite by allowing manufacturers to add almost GT-style wings and splitters to their cars, creating an arms race, resulting in the doors being opened for even crazier and crazier and crazier touring cars, even resulting in Williams, yes, that Williams, helping Renault to make their Laguna touring car. My sports regulations were completely messed up by win cars is a saying that rings true for both sports now. But you want to know what's even funnier than that? Chrysler and Alfa Romeo are now the same company, after Chrysler merged with Fiat to form Stellantis. I can hear you now saying, yeah, there's a few similarities in history, but they're still very different. For one, the BTCC has as many right turns as left, and for another, NASCAR has a very stupid and gimped point system. Well, about that point system, remember that class system I was telling you about earlier? Well, the BTCC used to be a multi-class series, with Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, and Class 4 cars, all with different engine size and weight limits on track together. The BTCC guys are probably cringing in embarrassment, now while the non-BTCC guys are probably wondering, okay, maybe this is like Le Mans, where the winner of the top class is the champion, and there's class champions, right? Well, no. The car with the most points is the champion. That being the most points, period. Meaning if you were a factory team in an uncompetitive class, you could just dominate every race in class, finishing 10th or 12th overall, and end up being overall champion, whilst the BMWs and Sierras are fighting at the front for overall wins and ending up with nothing. This isn't just a possibility or something else that I'm posturing here. This is quite literally what happened to the championship almost every single damn year. The overall champion would rarely ever come from the top class. That's why you have stories like John Cleland being champion in 1990 with a little Vauxhall Cavalier from Class B, or Chris Hodgetts becoming champion in 1986 with a little Toyota AE86 Corolla from Class C. If it sounds stupid and confusing to spectators, that's because in fact it is stupid and confusing to spectators. This nonsense has thankfully ended since the introduction of Super Touring and other regulation changes. You now only get one class of car now, and you have an overall champion and an independent champion, and that's it. Hopefully NASCAR will eventually follow their lead and get rid of their point system, which is, say it with me now, stupid and confusing to spectators. We NASCAR fans, like a sheltered college girl, love the bad boys in our sport. The most beloved driver in the history of NASCAR is called the Intimidator, and the reason our sport got so big on national television was because of a fist fight after a race had ended. Well, the saloon car series across the pond has its own fair share of personalities and rivalries as well. The first that probably comes to mind for most touring car fans is the decades-long enmity between Matt Neal and Jason Plato, both supremely talented and driven wheelmen in their own right, both clawing their way from humble beginnings to become icons of the sport. And both fucking hated each other, including one particularly haunting moment where Matt Neal approached Jason Plato with absolute bloody murder in his eyes, with Plato goading him on. Plato would later admit that thinking this would give Matt a points deduction or even an outright disqualification would help Jason win the championship. They've both cooled down, and as time heals, and would have, in one of the most shocking scenes any BTCC fan will ever see, managed to sit down and praised each other for clean driving, without any point attempting to strangle each other. Other notable personalities include the tough French import Yvan Miller, and John Cleland, who infamously announced that he was going for first. None of the before-mentioned names were ever afraid to use their fenders to get ahead, whether that landed them in hot water with their teams or with Toka, and the fans loved every second of it. The image of Jason Plato spinning Matt Neal is as popular to BTCC fans as the Intimidator rattling Terry Labonte's cage is to NASCAR fans. So there you have it. Maybe that little grocery getter series in the UK isn't all too far different from our silly little series we have over here, where we tend to drive around in big circles. Maybe if you're a NASCAR fan who thinks turning right is unpatriotic and wrong, you might be curious to watch the 1991 season finale at Silverstone. And if you're already a BTCC lifer, maybe you're now curious to watch what the Yanks enjoy so damn much.
But the talking points at Knock Hill were not all so positive.
When Ivan started playing games and Jason ran me from behind, tell you what, that was just disgraceful. He's an absolute pig, Plato, and I'll tell you what, I hope Seattle are proud of their lead driver, the way he's driving. That was awful.
This might be deja vu all over again, but in reverse. And Labonte inside of Earnhardt. He taps him going into the third corner. He gets way down on the apron of the track, coming to the white flag. There's a leader change, and Labonte takes the lead. And meanwhile, Ricky Rudd trying to... Oh, and Earnhardt spins him out. Oh, man. And Tony Stewart is involved in the crash, as is Mark Martin, Sterling Marlin, and several others. Dale Earnhardt takes the checkered flag. And Jimmy Spencer ran second.
Terry got into me in the middle of 3 and 4, and I was going to get back to him and just rattle him. I wasn't going to wreck him, but I got to him and he turned him around. So didn't mean to really turn around, meant to rattle his cage, though.